Hey, welcome to another episode of Charity Therapy. This is one of your hosts, Megan, coming at you with a little message at the top of the episode here. At Burke & Law, we get tons and tons of questions about 501c3 status from the IRS, how to get it, what it means, how to keep it, and more. So today, we're going to be re-airing an episode from a few years ago that gets into all the details about that 501c3 status. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to Charity Therapy, the podcast where we explore the ups and downs of the nonprofit sector and answer your burning questions. I'm your host, Jess Birkin, owner of Birkin Law Office, and I'm excited you're here. Imagine hanging out with me and my super smart, funny nonprofit expert pals. You get to ask them anything about your nitty-gritty nonprofit life and get their wisdom for free. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just strapping on your nonprofit boots, we're here to share stories and remind you you're not alone on this journey. So get ready to join the conversation and bring me the tough questions. I ain't scared. Ready to rock? Let's dive in. Hey, Megan, how are you?
I'm doing well, Jess. How are you doing?
You know, I'm good. I'm living the dream. We had some crazy storms here last week in Minnesota, and I got a little water in the basement. So, you know, I'm feeling the homeowner pain today as I look at new gutters and excavator services.
That's those fun end of summer things with those thunderstorms. Can't beat it.
Gotta love it. At least we had rain. That's
right?
What I was
We
happy
needed
about.
It so bad. Yeah. All right. So today we're going to tackle some questions all about nonprofits' tax-exempt status from the IRS. Jess, before we jump in, we hear the phrase 501c3 all the time, but what does that actually mean?
Okay, I like this question because there's a couple of things here. So there's what people generally think of, and then there's like what the IRS does. And the IRS sees 501c3 nonprofits in these two big groups, private foundations and public charities. And what most people think of when they hear 501c3 is the public charity group. And I think that's because private foundations, they already have money and don't go around asking for individual gifts. So when we're saying 501c3, most people really mean public charity. And so public charities are 501c3s, and that's like churches, hospitals, schools, colleges, universities, and your garden variety nonprofits that you work with on a day-to-day basis, like your pet rescue, human services organizations, all of those things that have missions that qualify them for tax exemption and making deductible gifts are in that category because they serve the public. And these groups do a lot of fundraising, and they get funding not from one big pot of money like a private foundation, but they get funding from all over. They get money from donors and foundation grants and government grants and other nonprofits. And so they are public charities because they're supported by the public and they serve the public. So that's pretty much what makes a 501c3 public charity.
Yeah, I don't think that's the answer most people would have expected. So that is good. All right. So ready for the first question?
Yes.
All right. I am on the board of a small 501c3 nonprofit, and we are finally getting our operations off the ground. Hooray! We're talking about hiring our first employee, and my treasurer keeps talking about payroll taxes. I thought nonprofits were exempt from all taxes. Do we really have to pay payroll tax?
Oh, this is a great question, and bless that treasurer for existing. This comes up all the time with really tiny groups, and the short answer is yes. You have to pay payroll tax when you hire an employee, and you should get a payroll processor. And not to go totally down a rabbit hole, but you need like workers' compensation insurance and employer's loss coverage and all the other things that come along with being a business that employs people. And there are other taxes that you might have to pay depending on what your operations include. You might need to pay sales and use tax, or if you have real estate, you might need to pay property tax. So when nonprofits say they're tax exempt, a lot of smaller folks like that don't have a ton of experience in like the professional world of nonprofiting, they just think it means, but we're a nonprofit and we don't pay taxes. Well, that's just income tax exemption. It's not all tax exemption. So
as much as you might hope.
Yeah, you're right. Fingers crossed that maybe the IRS won't notice is not a viable strategy for this group. So yes, the treasurer is correct. You do have to pay payroll taxes and do other things that businesses have to do. You just don't have to pay income tax unless it's unrelated business income, but that's a whole nother question for another day.
We'll put a pin in that one and come back to it later. Okay, great. So question number 2, I have 2 nonprofits, a 501c3 and a 501c4. The 2 organizations work together towards the same mission, but obviously the C4 does the lobbying that the C3 cannot do. I was thinking it might be easier to merge them into one nonprofit so we can do all the work that we're doing under one name and one entity. Is it possible to have one nonprofit with 2 tax-exempt statuses?
Okay, so anytime someone starts out with, I have a nonprofit, it automatically just makes me nervous. I'm always like, where's your board? Where's the we in this situation? But, whatever, I digress. I'm going to conclude this is a very small group when people say, I have a nonprofit. So the straight answer is just no. A nonprofit cannot have 2 tax-exempt statuses. The IRS is not running a buffet. You can't take a little from every plate. That's just not how it works. But that's not to say that there are no solutions. It could be possible that the nonprofit would be less complicated as just a C3. A lot of people who are running very small nonprofits or don't have a ton of nonprofit tax and compliance and operations experience just think a C3 cannot do any advocacy or lobbying work. They hear about you can't have political activity, and that means you can't advocate, do government relations or lobbying. And that's just not true. They can do some things. They can do some lobbying, but the key word there is some. You can't do political activity. That's a different episode. The big thing is whether this lobbying is a substantial part of their activity. Now, how the hell do you calculate what is substantial? Well, there are a couple of different methods, and, I don't want to get into the weeds about percentages and H elections. I'll just say this person should be asking their nonprofit CPA or their attorney for some guidance around whether they could combine the 2 organizations based on the amount of total activity that would be for the one nonprofit. And because that might save them the administrative burden of running these 2 corporations and keeping it all separate. And that's what's important to me about this question is that can be a lot. Mm-hmm. Running a nonprofit, and this person who says, I have a nonprofit, I tend to infer this is a very small operation. I have a nonprofit, generally, probably you don't have a C-suite and an org tree with a bunch of staff, or you wouldn't be saying it that way. And that might be why they're looking to consolidate, because you and I both know running a nonprofit is a lot of work, and it's more than most people imagine it's going to be when they start out.
And then multiplying that by 2. Yeah. It's just
right.
all
and
the things. 2
keeping it all
990s.
separate, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're working kind of jointly on this thing, but you have to keep all these separate books, and you have to make sure these expenses stay over here and that you don't get in trouble by just the whole thing can be very complicated. So this group could theoretically have one organization. They may have just knee-jerk reaction created a C4 thinking they had to and they don't have to, or they could have so much activity in there that it would be substantial. I don't know, but they should get some advice on that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we've got one more question here today. And the writer says, I started a nonprofit a few years ago, and we filed the Form 1023-EZ and got our 501c3 status. The organization was pretty much in sleep mode since then because I was going through some personal issues that kept me from putting enough effort into getting things going. Now I'm back and ready to go, but I just got a letter from the IRS saying that my status has been revoked. How could it have possibly been revoked? I haven't even used it yet.
Okay, I was really loving the we at the front of this question. We filed the form, awesome. Yeah. That was a good sign. but then they want back to the I statements.
Yep.
Very important to keep the we in your nonprofit, because when only one person is trying to keep it all alive, even in sleep mode, it can be overwhelming and it can be easy to lose track of things if you're just one person. That's my guess about what happened here. Just reading between the lines, you know. The letter from the IRS, without seeing it, is probably a notice of revocation. The notice letter probably says, hey, nonprofit X, you're no longer income tax exempt. Please start filing your taxes accordingly. Sincerely, the IRS. Why does that happen? Well, you haven't even used it. That whole...
It's like a shirt. I haven't even gotten to wear it yet.
Right. Yeah, it's problematic. But look, the IRS doesn't care if your nonprofit was active or inactive. What they care about is compliance. Like all nonprofits, even the tiniest ones, have to file a tax form each year. It's the Form 990. And for the smallest nonprofits, it's the 990N. And it's online and it's super easy to do, even though it can be intimidating for people who are just starting out. But it's also very easy to forget to do if you kind of aren't doing anything and just living your busy life or dealing with personal problems. So my guess is this person's board sort of fell apart. They're sort of trying to keep it alive on their own. They forgot to file the 990N in the first year. They forgot to file the 990N in the second year. And then they forgot to file the 990N in the third year. And in the third year in a row, when you haven't filed, the IRS says, yoink, you're done. And they take away your tax exempt status. Because if you can't even do the compliance thing that they pay attention to, just that one, because there's like loads and loads of other things that you're supposed to be doing that they don't necessarily check up on routinely, right? It's only if you get audited. If you can't do that one thing that they expect from you every year without fail for 3 times in a row, then it just goes bye-bye. And this can be really hard for small nonprofits because like it can be a lot of effort to apply for tax exemption. And, you know, you remember we've had a few clients where they just really started to get traction and then this happens. Like because they are just starting to get traction and they've kind of lost track of the compliance details, which is even worse because suddenly people want to give you money and you can't say you're a C3 anymore. The IRS doesn't care. They don't care and they don't have time to figure out if the nonprofit is sleeping or it's not doing anything or it's just getting going. They just need to know that you're doing the thing they want you to do. And when their database triggers this error, it's automatic. That letter just goes out. It's not like some jerk at the IRS looked at your file and said, I'm going to crush them. It's just an automatic process. It's called automatic revocation, and it's not personal to you. There are some fixes. You can just reapply and let there be like a gap in your exemption time, which if you've been doing nothing is probably okay. If you need to get retroactive reinstatement so that people who did give you money previously can continue to rely on that deduction, you know, that can be harder. And especially for the little guys, you know, that's why we're building our DIY Mission Guardian solutions for people like this that can't really afford to hire me for white glove service, right? But also, this person, I would just encourage them to really take a hard look and consider, is this worth doing? Like, are you really ready to go? Or have you been sort of doing the self-flagellation shame spirals for the last several years about how you haven't really been doing this and you're beating yourself up about it. And now you're like, I'm going to do it. And maybe you don't need to do it. Maybe it's not the most important thing in your life. And maybe it's okay to just close down the nonprofit at this point. You've lost the tax exemption. So this is just a good point to say, is this something I truly want to put the effort into, you know, breathing new life into, getting the board activated, doing the fundraising, doing all the compliance? It's okay to say that didn't work. Sometimes feeling bad about not doing it is mentally worse for you than just letting it go.
Yeah, and letting it go can feel so hard when it's like, people often start nonprofits for personal reasons or
Right.
because they have some sort of emotional connection to the mission. So it's a hard pill to swallow, but sometimes it is the best for you to just let that go. So
yeah. And I mean, I know as like an overachiever that I'm better about it now, but historically I've tended to say yes to too many things. It's like sometimes you just got to say no to something, Who knows? Maybe this person's been going to treatment, getting their life completely back on track. That's a little bit more important than running a charity right now.
Right.
So depending on your circumstances, like give yourself some grace. Like you don't have to do this.
Totally. Awesome. So Jess talked a lot about tax exemption. If we only remembered 2 things from this episode, what would they be?
Number one, nonprofits do pay tax. They just don't pay income tax. They're regular businesses that have to live in the business world, and they have a special income tax status, but it's not a hall pass to avoid all responsibility. So stay on top of what your requirements are, especially if you're hiring an employee. That's a big step. And then I guess number 2 is file that 990. File your 990. It is the one thing that you can rest assured the IRS is looking for. They might not audit you, but they will know if you don't file your 990. So file it on time. And if things are rough, that's the one thing you got to make sure you do. Megan, thanks for being my co-pilot today. This was a good one.
Yeah, these were some good questions.
Folks, if you enjoyed this episode, do us a huge favor. Share it with a friend. Rate, review, subscribe on your podcast app. It really helps out the podcast. If you have a question or a story to share, I want to hear from you. Send me a note online. Leave me a voice memo by calling 612-208-9120 or find us at charitytherapy.show. Thanks for listening. All right, folks, that's our show. Be sure to follow me on Instagram or Twitter at Jess Birkin. We want to hear from you. Send us a message at our website, charitytherapy.show. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at birkinlaw.com/signup. Charity Therapy is a production of Birkin Law Office, PLLC. Our theme song is by Whalehawk. And remember, folks, this podcast is produced for your entertainment and is not a substitute for actual legal advice.